Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink, it is time for some Path of Exile discussion. Today, I wanted to put together a guide to Admiral Valerius. This is one of the bosses of the patch 3.25 Settlers of Kalguur expansion, and this is a boss that you'll encounter once one of your ships gets commandeered by pirates. He's the leader of the pirates, you'll be able to kill him and take his loot. And you'll even get to be a hero to the town NPCs that you'll be able to save from certain death by doing this. This fight looks like it's going to be hard because it's monster level 84 and the boss actually does have fairly high stats when it comes to defenses. His defensive profile looks pretty similar to that of the Shaper, with about 90 million hit points and a fairly large chunk of armor, about 100,000. That said, this boss is much more forgiving than the Shaper. Even though you only get one portal, this fight is much easier to defeat. That's because his telegraph slams, one, they're well telegraphed, but two, they just don't do all that lethal an amount of damage. Let's go through the abilities that he uses. Firstly, there is the anchor. The anchor will drop from the sky onto an area that's marked out on the ground. You will have 1.56 seconds to get out of this, and if it hits you, it's going to deal damage that is fairly high, but that is endurable. The character that you see me playing here is a gladiator with 68% attack block, 65% spell block, about 12,000 armor, 76% fire res, 75% cold res, and 75% lightning res. AKA, these are not strong defenses, and I've intentionally kept this character on a 5 link for the purposes of recording this video, because I want it to be something that's easy to mimic. Anyways, the anchor drop hits me once in this. It's pretty easy to dodge for the whole fight, but I did want to know how much damage it did, and it was survivable. That said, to be able to endure a critical hit from it, you'll need to have better gear than I do here. Important to note that this cannot be blocked and it cannot be evaded, so plan accordingly, aka get out of the way when it's dropping. Now the second ability we want to talk about is the Cannonfire. Here, he'll mark out a red area on the ground, and that red area on the ground will be persistently bombarded by cannons for a considerable period of time. These cannons do considerable damage, but it is very survivable, so it's something that you want to get out of, but if there's something more important to dodge, then make sure that the other thing takes precedence. It is okay to run into the red zone in order to get out of the blue zone when an anchor is about to drop down. Let's just talk quickly about one of the strategic things you need to keep in mind with the Cannonfire. The best positioning for the Cannonfire is towards the edges of the arena. That means you generally want to be fairly close to the edges in phases 1 and 2. That will make it easier to manage where the Cannonfire is. Later in the fight though, once you get to phase 3, which is when he's under a third life, that's when you're going to have less control over this because you'll have more important things to deal with. The third move that he'll use is a very obvious forward charge. Now, one of the ways that I recommend that you deal with all of the mechanics in this fight, you want to keep an idea of where Valerius is relative to your character, and that includes if he goes off screen. Then, whenever you hear a voice line from him, one of 3 things will happen. Either there'll be a blue marker around your character, in that case, anchor drop, 1.56 seconds to get out of the way. Or it'll be a red marker, which means cannons are going to start bombarding that area, and you want to get out of the way. The third possibility is that neither of those happen. In that case, he is going to do a dash towards you. You probably want to dodge this, I don't suggest enduring it, and so that's something where you want to dodge laterally to his current position. For instance, if he is due north of you, the best way to dodge is due east or due west, but if that's not an obstacle because of other arena hazards, then southeast or southwest is the way to go. So that's Valerius himself. The intensity of these mechanics will increase from phase 1 to phase 2, and then from phase 2 to phase 3 they'll stay constant, but there'll be additional arena hazards. Now, let's talk about the intermission phases. When Valerius falls to 67% health and then again at 33%, he will go temporarily invincible, and there'll be a bullet hell phase. This bullet hell phase is much easier than the other bullet hell phases in the game. So if you're familiar with the Searing Exarch, this is a lot easier than the Searing Exarch. Maybe it's in line with the easiest version of the Exarch bullet hell, the one that you get when the boss has between 50 and 75% health on the non-Uber version of the fight. In that case, the Searing Exarch summons only 8 waves of meteors, and that's much easier to deal with than the ones with 12 or 16. They come up when the Exarch's hit points are lower. Valerius's bullet hell is probably only slightly harder to dodge than the 8-wave version of the Searing Exarch's one. The key difference though is that it's much more forgiving. If you make some small mistakes, you're likely to be able to survive. And that is because when you get to phase 3, you're going to be dealing with a lesser version of the bullet hell while you're fighting Valerius himself. This is the most intense phase of the fight, and during this I highly recommend that you have Culling Strike somewhere. That will mean that you will tremendously decrease the amount of time that you spend in this dangerous phase. Additionally, the punishment curse is extremely good because it will apply for this entire phase as long as you're able to actively keep it up on the boss. In terms of other considerations for the boss, Shield Charge seems to be by far the best movement skill for this fight, and I'm glad that I'm playing a character that just inherently wants to be using it. The reason for that is that it's always available when you need to get out of somewhere quickly, and you also don't have any of the disorientation that can sometimes come up with instant speed move skills, where you can find yourself unable to see exactly what's going on. The second thing you want to be aware of, and this is a big one, a lot of players with low and even medium end computers report that the game performance degrades considerably during the intermission phases. So be very aware of this. Whatever you do, don't use any skills during this period, because anything that you put up for skills, it'll just make it harder for you to see the things that are on the screen, and it will make it harder for your computer to render the things that are on the screen as well. Thirdly, outright element immunity, elemental element immunity, is really useful in this fight. It's not essential, but it will definitely help you. If you can't manage that though, consider going with the Brine King Pantheon. The Brine King Pantheon will give you a lot in this fight. Additionally, I highly recommend that your lesser Pantheon is Rizlatha in this fight. Rizlatha's Pantheon will allow Life Flask to passively recharge during the fight, because you will not be gaining many Flask charges. This is quite a Flask-starved fight, much like Cyrus Awakener of Worlds in that way, and so any form of passive recovery of Flask charges that you can build into your character is good, and the lowest opportunity cost for most players is to elect to use the Rizlatha Pantheon. Even if that's not the Pantheon you'd prefer to use for mapping, that's fine. You can always change it over later. Anyways, hopefully this has been useful and has allowed you to save some of your shipments that might have otherwise been commandeered. May your Valorbs have interesting results.